Hi guys, my name is Oded, and in this podcast we'll speak about software development in the field of medical device, pharmaceuticals, and healthcare with industry-leading experts. I hope you'll find this content useful. Let's start. Mr. Alan Grau, thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge with the community. Before we dive in, can you tell us a bit about your personal journey in the field of cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on. I'm happy to get on here and chat a little bit with you about what I see in cybersecurity. And so my background really is in started out early in my career in telecommunications, but was doing a lot of work on embedded devices and embedded systems. Back before we really started talking about IoT. But one of the things that we saw, so I was a co-founder at a company called Icon Labs, and we were doing a lot of custom development projects and had some protocol related solutions for people building embedded devices. And early on there was really very little consideration given to security, and we saw the market trend overall for the growing number of cyber attacks and the increased connectivity of these devices, and really specialized in building security solutions for IoT devices. And so really that's where I started out, early on doing things like, you know, SSH solutions and SSH toolkits for embedded devices, that would run on things like VxWorks and some things like that. And then eventually built out a full set of, solutions for secure boot and embedded firewall, secure key storage, and things like that for embedded devices. And about 2 years ago, we were acquired by Sectigo, and Sectigo is one of the leading certificate authority companies that has a strong presence in the IoT. And so, with that, now we've got kind of a broader view of what companies are doing for security in the IoT space. So, I've had a long history of working with security from early connected devices up through the recent IoT devices across a broad set of vertical markets.
Maybe you can walk us through the evolution of cybersecurity in the field of embedded and how it relates to the evolution of cybersecurity in general. I mean, do they have kind of a symbiotic relation between them?
Yeah, so if you look at kind of the history of computing across, you kind of see a common trend that people start to develop a new technology. They, initially it works in a fairly standalone situation. Then all of a sudden they start connecting devices, and all of a sudden they start getting hacked, and people are like, "Oh wow, we need to address security." And so security becomes it's kind of an afterthought, and is people are kind of left playing catch up. I mean, that was true with early mainframes, right? It's like they started to connect them, and then people started hacking them, and they started to build security around that. It was true with the PC world, right? I mean, people started connecting PCs, and then all of a sudden you had all this the viruses and the antivirus companies sprung up. In mobile devices it's true, in IoT it's true, right? In SCADA devices or in industrial control devices, right? People don't worry about security until it's happened. um, and and then so they're building all these great solutions and great connectivity, but they aren't really concerned about security at first, and they think that, well, these aren't that interesting. There's not that many of them. They're kind of isolated, or whatever the excuse is to not address security, and then suddenly it's too late and they're playing catch up.
Yeah, on a more personal note, I can share that for me, my experience with cybersecurity was that everything that you do before you experience the cybersecurity event seems like, oh, you're doing too much, it's overkill, okay, let's do it just to make sure. And after the event, everything you did before seems like, oh, I did too little, I should have. So it's
Yeah,
really
no,
touching that point.
and I think that's true, right? It was true for you on an individual basis, but I think it's kind of true on an industry by industry basis too. So if we look at IoT, people started out by saying, well, we'll use SSH for communication, or we'll use TLS for communication. Well, they start out with just open, unencrypted communication, and then they're like, well, we need to do a little bit more, so we'll put an encrypted protocol into place. And then they realize they need a better solution for managing keys and certificates, and then they realize they need other solutions. And so it starts out with very little. They start adding one layer of security, They realized they need more of a comprehensive device hardening solution. So they had things like secure boot, secure firmware updates, and then they realized that they need to be able to manage all of this. So then security management solutions and become really critical. So it's kind of the same evolution in IoT that we've seen in enterprise security. We start out with just a little bit, and then we start adding more and more, until we have a more comprehensive solution that really adds strong layers of defense. And then the game becomes, where are the holes, right? So okay, you've got a pretty strong solution, but then hackers are really good at finding places where there's weaknesses or vulnerabilities, or where those modern security solutions haven't been included or built in, and they're able to attack devices that way. So that's kind of the typical evolution of cybersecurity, both in an IoT and in other spaces as well.
Okay, and if you come to a software development org, and it's a traditional one, and that wants to make the transition to have a solid understanding of cybersecurity, what are your key steps or advice for that org to start? Maybe is it training for the then general developers? Is it having a cybersecurity expert reviewing the architecture constantly, or the code review to make sure that it's defensive enough? Uh, is it checking the software that they use from other suppliers for cybersecurity?
Yes, all of those really. So when we look at IoT cybersecurity, in some ways it's very similar to cybersecurity in general, right? The attacks are often similar. So if you have a good understanding and training for cybersecurity, for general IT cybersecurity, a lot of those principles still apply in the IoT space, or the medical IoT space, or really any of these areas. Um, where things get a little bit different is just understanding how to apply it specifically in this domain, and and that comes a little bit specialized. Many IoT devices are running very specialized hardware, specialized operating systems, and so you don't have the ability to add cybersecurity features to the device afterwards. It has to be built in during the manufacturing process. Now, it depends a little bit on the specifics of the device. If it's an IoT device that's really based upon a Windows platform or a Linux platform, but with some, but then you have more traditional tools that you can apply. But many of these devices are closed devices. The firmware can't be updated by the end user. You can't add applications after they've been built. So the cybersecurity has to be built in by the OEM, by the company manufacturing the device itself. And then you run into some challenges because maybe you're running on a real-time operating system on specialized hardware, and so you can't run existing solutions that would run on Windows or Linux. And that's where I spent a lot of my career, was building solutions for those specialized devices. Now, as we've uh, over the last several years, companies have developed commercial solutions for these specialized devices for adding and building in cybersecurity. So, so there are now solutions available that can be purchased, but they're still specialized for these specific devices.
Can you give us example of an implementation of such a solution, just to get more context?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at an IoT device that's running on, maybe it's an ARM-based hardware, right? It's a different processor that's built, that's runs on a memory-constrained device, right? So you don't have, you know, you have a real-time operating system, perhaps. So you're running an operating system like VxWorks or ThreadX or MicroCOS that's designed for these limited resource devices. You don't have a lot of extra memory. You don't have a lot of extra processing power. So you can't just go run, the antivirus and the security solutions that you'd run on your Windows PC. So there are, Sectigo, now offers a secure boot solution, a secure key storage solution, and an embedded firewall solution that are specialized for those types of devices. And there are other providers that have those sorts of solutions, but they're designed to be integrated into these, you know, uh, these devices, some of which are very inexpensive and very small. You can have a wearable device. I mean, there are people that are building um, wearable, a specialized smartwatch that can be used in industrial settings that allow them to communicate with other devices, in that industrial setting. But again, they're quite inexpensive and quite resource constrained.
Um, we heard in the news about a number of hospitals being attacked with ransomware during the COVID pandemic. I mean, what role or in the supply of the tools that used within healthcare is the medical devices? Are they a weak link when someone wanna attack a healthcare system? And how does it? Do you have an example of a medical device being hacked?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of things there. I mean, many of the devices against health, or many of the ransomware attacks against healthcare systems or other industrial or critical infrastructure systems, often are still attacking the IT systems. So they are you know um, still attacking just servers and Windows machines and getting access that way. That said, the um, the medical devices themselves often can be a weak link in the security. Those devices are specialized devices. Many of them will have a much longer life cycle than a PC, right? A typical enterprise is going to replace PCs every 3, 4, 5 years. So there's you have relatively modern equipment. A medical device, you might use that for 10 or 15 years. So it's running old hardware, old software that may have old vulnerabilities in it. So there've been a number of attacks against medical devices. And, if you do a quick Google search on, cyber attacks against medical devices, you'll get a long list of examples. There've been examples of, a connected insulin pump that hackers were able to compromise. Um, there was an example of, I'm trying to remember the details on this one, but I think they were called the MedJack attacks, and it's something that was 5 or 6 years ago, where some specific medical devices, hackers were able to compromise the systems, install malware on the medical devices, things like scanning equipment, that were large pieces of equipment running in a healthcare office, but they weren't being managed by the IT department. They weren't under the same security procedures and protocols. So the malware was able to sit there undetected for a long time and kind of spread to other devices in the network and start stealing medical records and exfiltrating those. A third example I'll give is there was a set of vulnerabilities called, it was in the Trek TCP/IP stack, which is an embedded TCP/IP stack that's used in thousands and thousands of different types of devices, medical devices and other systems. And there was a set of vulnerabilities announced in that set of TCP/IP protocols, and those were built into over a period of 10, 15 years, built into thousands of different devices, which are not, in some cases, easily upgraded. And so people were able to leverage those, and go back and attack some of these older devices that were running old versions of the software. So yeah, there have been quite a few different examples, and again, it's easy to go out and do a Google search and find those.
And what are the regulation? And do you think the regulators are doing enough, the FDAs or others?
They're starting to do more for sure. We're working with several companies that are building medical devices, and they want to have greater cybersecurity built in from the scratch because they know that the FDA is starting to scrutinize devices more carefully in terms of cybersecurity requirements. I mean, the FDA does have cybersecurity guidance that they've published for medical devices, and are starting to hold companies to a higher standard around their need for cybersecurity in medical devices. So the situation is definitely improving. And then there's other general regulations. I mean, the U.S. passed a Cybersecurity Act, I think late last year. Australia's passed cybersecurity regulation. The EU certainly has regulation around cybersecurity for IoT devices that they've enacted. So we're definitely moving in the right direction, and I think that's important. The reality, as you said early on, right, until it happens to you, you feel like, well, whatever I'm doing is overkill. So I think there's, unfortunately, companies, in some cases, some companies have done a great job, but to really get a comprehensive solution, it does require regulation to enforce and push that.
And when you reach those companies, what are the key vulnerabilities you look for to start to analyze their current state and to have a plan how to mitigate that?
Well, it really depends on how we engage with the companies. Our company has a penetration testing team. So some companies will engage that team to come in and look at a product and understand the vulnerabilities and help them to determine how to remediate them. But what's really works even better is if we can get to engage with the company during the design phase and help them understand, what are the requirements for cybersecurity, what are the requirements for their device, and help them in their design and architecture phase and requirement phase to build the right components in. And I'm really a strong believer that you need a comprehensive security solution. You need to address, the excuse me, you need to address the integrity of the device. Having things like secure boot, secure firmware updates, the ability to detect if you've been attacked, embedded firewall, really all of the kind of key features for building security into the device. And then you need to ensure that you can ensure the identity of the device. So having a way for the device to be able to assert its identity. Often that's done using certificates, digital certificates, and PKI. But there are other solutions as well that can be used. So, and that helps ensure when you're communicating with a device or a device is communicating to a cloud service or another device, that you can verify that it's an authentic device that is who it says it is, and not a rogue device or a hacker that's trying to impersonate a device. And then the integrity piece, right, helps provide defense against someone, compromising the device, and breaking in and inserting malware on the device or taking control of the device. So you really do need a fairly comprehensive set of capabilities to ensure the security of your device. And then, the third piece then is the management of the devices. How do you know what devices are running on your network? How do you keep that, keep track of them and ensure the security posture and manage the policies for all of those devices? So there's really a lot that goes into it, but it's all things that we're doing on the IT side. We just need to establish and apply better on the IoT side.
That's fascinating. Alan, thank you very much for taking the time. How can the listener follow your publications or hear more about Sectigo?
Yeah, so yeah, if you can find me fairly easily, just if you Google my name, and you can find me on Twitter. Sectigo has a fairly active social media presence, where we're publishing things, and we've got a YouTube channel where we've got some videos on IoT security. So yeah, you can check out all those things.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Odette. It was great to chat with you.